We begin with the escalating crisis in Iraq. President Obama is now weighing a range of options, including U.S. military action, in response to what he calls a terrorist offensive, not only threatening Iraq's government, but potentially, he says, even the United States. In a statement from the White House South Lawn, the president stressed, though no U.S. troops will be sent back into combat, as the Pentagon plans to move a U.S. aircraft carrier into the Persian Gulf to be ready for a possible airstrikes, there are other options on the table. CNN is covering this story from every angle with a global team of correspondents and analysts. First, let's bring in our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr. She's working her sources. What are you learning, Barbara?
Wolf, here at the Pentagon, there certainly is anxiety. Could this be Iraq one more time with less than perfect intelligence? Even as the militants continue advancing towards Baghdad, President Obama is still looking at all military options except for sending ground troops.
I have asked my national security team to prepare a range of other options that could help support Iraq security forces.
But the Pentagon repeatedly not willing to endorse Iraqi security forces. I'd like to ask again, does the United States military think the Iraqi military can hold, does this department, does Secretary Hagel think that the Iraqi forces can hold Baghdad?
I didn't give up any opportunity not to answer. I take every opportunity I can not to answer your questions.
The joking, not hiding military reality after spending $730 billion on the war, with nearly 4,500 U.S. troops killed and 32,000 wounded.
I'll just say, yes, we were surprised and disappointed by the poor performance of some Iraqi security force units. They're up in the north.
Airstrikes pose significant problems. There are no U.S. ground troops with up-to-the-minute intelligence to guide airstrikes. The militants don't have military bases, command and control centers, or missile batteries to attack and therefore degrade their capability. Fighters are dispersed in trucks, moving in cities. Civilian casualties could occur. One bright spot, this week the Pentagon began drone reconnaissance flights over northern and western Iraq to give the Maliki government intelligence on where militants are located. But there are still so many holes. The Pentagon says it doesn't know if Iranian fighters have entered Iraq. If the Pentagon can't even confirm that there are Iranian fighters on the ground, what is the quality of the intelligence? How can you give the president realistic options if there's so many holes in the intelligence?
Intelligence is never perfect. It's not a perfect science. It never has been. It never will be. It's an important capability.
And certainly the intelligence about Iraq, as all Americans know, has never been perfect. Far from it over the years. Right now, what the Pentagon wants, what the White House appears to want is the government of Nouri al-Maliki to stand up, fight for itself, get its forces back in the fight. But right now, that is going to be very problematic. Wolf?
It certainly will be very problematic. Barbara, thank you very much. Don't go too far away. Let's go to our White House correspondent, Michelle Kaczynski. Michelle, ultimately, of course, the president has to decide what he is going to authorize. He has already said U.S. troops will not re-engage on the ground.
That's right. You know, the president has been accused of napping while the situation in Iraq degraded. Today, he obviously wanted to show that he is focused on this difficult problem. Both he and his administration emphasizing that any U.S. military action would require political action on the part of the Iraqi government.
We can't do it for them. And in the absence of this type of political effort, short-term military action, including any assistance we might provide, won't succeed. So this should be a wake-up call. Iraq's leaders have to demonstrate a willingness to make hard decisions and compromises on behalf of the Iraqi people in order to bring the country together.
So what does this administration want to see from the Iraqis? Well, political engagement and an agenda that is inclusive. That's something that they've been looking for a long time, but has not been happening. Okay, so what happens now? Well, today the president emphasized that making a decision is going to take several days, not something that's going to happen overnight. Plus, they need to gather as much intelligence as possible. Barbara Starr laid out some of those difficulties in conducting something like airstrikes over Iraq. We do know, and it's important to emphasize, that the urgency of the situation is not even yet such that the president would change his weekend plans to stay in California, but he is going to stay in contact with his national security team. There was a high-level meeting last night, another one this morning. We also know that he and his administration are going to be reaching out to world leaders to see what kind of international support there would be for possible military action. And that started today with a call to Canada's prime minister. The president could also be reaching out to congressional leadership before a decision is made. And at this point, doesn't look like that's going to happen before the start of next week, Wolf.
Yeah, he said a few times the next few days. At one point, he said several days. We'll see how long it takes for some final decisions to be made. Michelle, thanks very much. Joining us now to break all of this down, he was the top U.S. diplomat on the ground as U.S. troops were leaving Iraq, the former U.S. ambassador to Iraq, James Jeffrey. Also, our chief national security correspondent, Jim Sciutto, is with us, as well as our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr. Jim, you've been talking, first of all, to your sources. You're getting some new information. What are you picking up?
That's right, Wolf. I talked to a U.S. counterterrorism official who tells me that the U.S. Intelligence Committee warned in the spring of this year that ISIS was targeting Baghdad and Mosul, and that ISIS had also conducted probing attacks around Mosul, indicating their intentions of attacking there. I'm told that the intelligence community, in fact, issued multiple assessments, particularly over the last year, detailing ISIS's growing strength, but also its territorial ambitions to take territory inside Iraq. And this is important because there's been a lot of talk about whether this was a complete surprise. Clearly, there were intelligence warnings out there about this for a number of months, and about specific targets, Baghdad and Mosul, which speaks to the strength of these groups. The one thing I am told by the intelligence community that has been surprising was how quickly the Iraqi military melted away. That was the one thing that no one predicted.
Yeah, and you're saying this is from the U.S. intelligence community, not the U.S. intelligence committee or whatever.
No, this is the U.S. intelligence community.
This is the U.S. intelligence community,
yes,
suggesting they knew weeks and weeks ago that ISIS was planning on moving in not only to Mosul or whatever, but to Baghdad itself.
That they issued multiple assessments over the course of the last year about its territorial ambitions inside Iraq, and that recently, just in the last couple of months, in the spring, they made a specific assessment that talked about specific targets being Baghdad and Mosul. As we know, Mosul fell just in the last week, and we know that those ISIS forces are now moving closer to the capital.
Ambassador Jeffrey, you were the U.S. ambassador there, the top U.S. ambassador, the top U.S. diplomat on the scene. What do you make of this? They were warned weeks ago this was happening, but it seems like it's been such a surprise to so many top officials.
It was certainly a surprise that a very large force of Iraqi troops would essentially drop their weapons and flee from northern Iraq. This is something that we hadn't seen during 6 months of fighting between the ISIL people and the Iraqi army, for example, in Fallujah and Ramadi, closer to Baghdad. This is really inexplicable.
Why is that? Why? I mean, these are tens of thousands of highly trained, U.S. trained, we should say, U.S. armed Iraqi troops, soldiers. They take off their uniforms, they put their guns down, and they start running away in the face of what maybe a few thousand ISIS terrorists who are moving in.
Bad leadership at the level of generals, and I blame that on the Iraqi government. Prime Minister Maliki and people around him have politicized the military. Prime Minister Maliki himself has basically seen these troops as occupiers, as do the largely Sunni population of Mosul. I saw this myself when I saw them up there. So therefore, these were troops who were not motivated to fight for territory they didn't feel was theirs.
Jim, show us where these ISIS forces are now in control, because these are very significant areas. They've already got a big chunk of Syria.
No question. I mean, you see them, if they've moved down here, Mosul was the first to fall, came further down south. Baiji, this has a major oil refinery there, so strategically important. They targeted Tikrit. We understand that this is now under contention because Iraqi government forces say that they pushed them back, have been able to reclaim some parts of that.
Kurdish forces have taken over a lot of those areas.
And that's what the Kurdish forces did, actually, is they swooped in and took Kirkuk, which is a city that the Kurds have had their eyes on for some time. Kirkuk is just to the south of Mosul, about over here. Also, Fallujah. You remember this going back weeks ago. There's been an ongoing battle over Fallujah. There were times when ISIS forces controlled most of it. There's been a push and pull there as well. What I'm told by counterterrorism officials is that ISIS needed to have help to make this very quick progress south in these last several days, help from Sunni tribes, help from Sunni nationalist groups, and that has helped them. And I'm also told by a counterterrorism official that as long as they have that help, they're going to be able to maintain this territory here in Mosul, in Baji, around Tikrit, possibly around Fallujah, absent a major counterterrorism offensive.
The president was pretty specific, and I want you to show our viewers what he's talking about, Ambassador, because he said that he is worried that these ISIS Sunni Islamist terrorists could go after some Shia shrine, explode them or whatever. Listen to what the president said.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are dangers of fierce sectarian fighting if, for example, these terrorist organizations try to overrun sacred Shia sites, which could trigger Shia-Sunni conflicts that could be very hard to stamp out.
I think he's talking about Karbala, Najaf. You want to show our viewers where these areas around, if they were to go in there and blow up some of these Shia mosques, these Shia shrine, what would happen?
Well, the president has two problems. He needs a long-term solution to that red area. As he said, he cannot have a permanent presence of al-Qaeda in that area. That requires political engagement as much as military. He stressed that. He's absolutely right. But right now, he's got an immediate problem involving days. These forces are moving, these ISIL forces are moving to surround Baghdad, hit these holy sites of Shia Islam, Karbala, Najaf, Samarra. If they do that, they will besiege the forces, they will cut off supplies, electricity, everything, and the Iranians could well come in a big way. That's the dramatic situation that is facing the president right now.
There are reports Iranian Revolutionary Guard troops already have come into Iraq.
These are probably small numbers. We've seen this before. I'm not as troubled by that as if when they come in large numbers, they'll come in to relieve a siege of Baghdad or Karbala.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's interesting on that point, because on the one hand, you don't want Iran to get involved because that adds to this sectarian conflict. Of course, the Iranians coming on the side of the Shiites in the south, as separated from the Sunnis in the north, who are now supporting, or many Sunnis supporting ISIS. But on the other hand, this is an area where U.S. and Iranian interests actually overlap here. Neither the U.S. or Iran wants Iraq to collapse. You know, the Iranians, of course, want to empower the Shiites. We want to have a multi-party system there, but neither the U.S. or Iran wants a civil war in Iraq.
Let me get Barbara's quick reaction. Barbara, you get the sense over there that the U.S. military was surprised by the collapse of the Iraqi military in the north, at least around Mosul, and what's going on, this threat to the capital of Iraq right now, Baghdad?
Yeah, I think that the Pentagon, like the rest of the intelligence community, surprised about the speed, not surprised that it happened. The warnings were out there. This is not a classic intelligence failure. They knew that these fighters were out there, how fast they moved. This week alone, a big surprise. The intelligence problem now is what do you do about it, and how do you target a bunch of fighters, thousands of people out there, perhaps, in very dispersed locations.
All right, Barbara's at the Pentagon. Ambassador James Jeffrey, thanks very much for joining us. Jim Sciutto will be back later. When we come back, one of President Obama's toughest critics blaming him largely for this crisis, Senator John McCain. There you see him. He's standing by to join us live. Plus, one of the most famous airplanes on Earth, soon to be traded in for an extraordinary new model. We got some new information. We're taking you behind the scenes of the new Air Force One.